Sounds like you've been spending lots of time doing all kinds of wonderful clinical education, getting yourselves all recertified and all that great stuff that you get to do. And I get to come in and teach you things about what most people call soft skills. So some of those de-escalation and effective communication. Now, I also know that I am the thing that stands between you and lunchtime, and we're a little bit behind. So I'm going to do my very, very best to keep us on schedule, get through the content of the two presentations. As was said, my name is Amanda Kreischer. I am a licensed clinical social worker with the state of Maryland and have been in the field for, oh man, I guess 13 years now at this point. My diploma sits behind me. And I work for the Mental Health Association of Maryland. I always like to ask people, anybody familiar or know who the Mental Health Association of Maryland is? Raise a hands. No one. Okay, this is usually what happens when I come to a presentation. So the Mental Health Association of Maryland, we are one of the oldest state mental health associations. Second oldest. We were founded in 1915. Little history for you there. And our role is really to bring together everyone around mental health concerns. So consumers, advocates, professionals, concerned citizens, and really trying to work to provide education, resources, and work on kind of the policy initiatives as well. So we have three sort of arms of our organization. We have our training and education team. That's part of the team that I'm on. We have an advocacy team that really works to make sure that we are providing or ensuring that the legislation is reflective of the needs of those who are living with behavioral health conditions. And then we also have a team that works with our state behavioral health run facilities to ensure that the consumers that are there are receiving good and adequate treatment and help to advocate for them. So as a little bit about our organization, the Engage With program is one of the training programs, and today we're going to talk about some of the topics that we cover in our training, de-escalation and effective communication. Now I'm going to slide you guys over to my other screen so I can see the presentation in front of me. I have two computer screens right here. I am the kind of presenter who, while I am talking, if there are questions or things that come up, just shout at me and I will stop, because I don't want this to turn into me just kind of talking through it. I'm very much a skills-oriented type of trainer, so we're going to learn and we're going to do at the same time. So we're going to get some opportunities to practice. Any questions before we get started? Okay. So let's talk about what we're going to cover today. So our learning objectives are first to be able to provide examples of how to de-escalate an irritated or aggressive older adult and or really any adult. We're going to understand how our body language can be used to de-escalate a difficult situation. And finally, we're going to demonstrate skills to respond to common challenging behaviors. So how are we going to do that? We are going to get through our welcome. So we've done that. We're going to talk a little bit about the scope of the problem. We're going to talk about the good song RESPECT, find out what it means to, in this case, older adults or the adults that we're working with. We're going to talk about what's nonverbal communication got to do with it, and some de-escalation tactics. We're going to talk about and have an opportunity to practice some effective interventions. We actually have a kind of choose your own adventure game that we're going to do together, and I will also provide you with that link to that game so you can kind of practice a little bit more. We'll have some time for questions. We'll take a quick break, and then we'll jump into the effective communication. So let's talk a little bit about the scope of the problem. So we're really kind of going to focus our attention on individuals who might be living with some type of cognitive impairment. So oftentimes that might be the group that we are experiencing these types of challenges with. Now, before I talk about that, kind of from your own experience, is that in line? Would you say like most of the people who are experiencing aggression as you're working with them are older adults, younger adults? Kind of where's that line for you all? Mix of everything? So like bobbing of like, yes, mix of everything. Did I hear a comment?
Hear us?
I can hear you.
Okay.
All right, so I kind of saw some like bobbing of heads, sort of mix of everything. I'm going to give you a little statistics on kind of the older adult side. We can talk a little bit about kind of the younger side, but I think um, one of the things that I find in teaching this content is it doesn't matter what age group we're talking about as we talk about statistics. The skills and the techniques that we're going to learn apply to anyone, no matter what their age is. So just a little bit of background about those who are living with Alzheimer's dementia. Recent research shows that Alzheimer's dementia is associated with an increased odds of aggressive behavior, 5 times higher than a healthy individual. This aggressive behavior could include physical aggression, verbal outbursts, agitation, or crime. And overall, a meta-analysis that was conducted in 2019 found that 28% of individuals who are living with Alzheimer's dementia and 7% of those who are living with mild cognitive impairment are going to exhibit aggressive behaviors. What time frame in a person's life or sort of day do you think most of these behaviors come out? At night? When you walk in the door? Does that happen where you walk in the door and as soon as the person sees you, maybe they start to act a little more aggressive, or are you kind of coming in when that situation is already escalated? What was that?
A mix.
Mix of both. Okay. Yeah. So so again, what was that?
He said you gotta talk loud.
There
Yes,
was a guy that made fun of me for talking loud, trying to escalate the situation.
See, you guys,
No,
you guys
no.
all the way in the back, that's the problem. Even though I have my headset on. Yeah, so we're gonna probably see this kind of both situations. You know, you come into a situation, the person's already aggressive. Your job now is to do your job, but you have to be able to do that job in a way that's not going to cause harm to yourself. So we're going to talk about some of those skills that we can use potentially to de-escalate those situations. Or if you come in and things are like relatively okay, but then the person starts to get escalated, again, we're going to talk about how do we use some of those de-escalation tactics. And what we're really going to focus on are those non-medication de-escalation tactics. And we'll talk about what those all look like. Okay, so a couple of things that are really important to remember when we're working with individuals. So how a person responds to us is going to depend on a couple different things. So one, how are they actually being treated? This is something that we control directly. It also is going to depend on their perception of the care that they're getting or their perception of how they're being treated. This is influenced by us. Do you think that there's times where their perception of the way that they're being treated is different than the perception that we have of how we're treating them? Yeah. Yep, that's usually where we start to run into some problems is there's kind of this differing of opinions as to like what's actually happening. So we can't control how they feel, but we can influence it by making sure that we are approaching the situation in a calm, effective manner, that we're communicating effectively. So all these skills that we're going to be talking about can all kind of come together to help us influence how that person perceives the care that we're giving them. And the severity of their symptoms, these are things that we obviously can accurately report. So what is the severity? Is it changing over the time that you're with them between arrival and potentially getting to the hospital, whatever that case might be? So let's talk about respect. And before I kind of show you my sort of thoughts and opinions on respects, how do you define it? What does it look like? What does it sound like?
Treating someone the way you want to be treated.
Yes. Okay. So treating somebody the way that you want to be treated. Okay. What else? Do I need to start singing the song? RESPECT. So what does it mean to you? How do you expect people to treat you? What does respect look like for you? Let's start there.
Back, it was mumbled, be a decent human being.
Okay, being a decent person. Yeah, absolutely. How do you address people when you meet them for the first time?
By name, sir, ma'am, please, thank you.
Okay, so that the politeness, sort of that connection. So, sir, ma'am, Mr., Mrs. Um, using your pleases and thank yous, absolutely being polite. Um, I always think about kind of. I'm not originally from Maryland, so I grew up in Central New York, and when I moved to Maryland and had my first job as a caseworker in Baltimore City, DSS. Um, all of my clients called me Miss Amanda. And I was like, this is the weirdest thing in the entire world. No one had ever called me Miss Amanda. I was so confused by it because for me, like, I'm like, nah, I'm just Amanda. Like, just call me Amanda, but don't call me like Miss Rakowski, which was my maiden name. Um, and it took me a little while to realize that, like, culturally in Maryland, that was them being respectful to me. Um, it wasn't my perception of respect because that isn't what I had grown up with. So when we think about respect, this is where that perception can really come into play as well. Because if we think we're being respectful, that doesn't necessarily mean that the person that we're interacting with sees it as respectful. So respect is really in the eye of the beholder. So somebody said, treating the person the way that you want to be treated. Maybe those are going to align with each other, or maybe that person is going to have a different way that they expect to be treated. Things like culture can play a role in that. Things like age can play a role in that. So, the takeaway that I always like to remember when it comes to being respectful to a person is that respect is in their eyes. So we can think we're doing all the right things. We can think that we're being respectful, but if we've somehow missed that mark, um, we may run into some challenges. So our job is to find out what does respect look like for that particular person. And so it could be that they want a partnership, that they are expecting kindness and being polite. They want to make a connection. There's trust, there's honor, um, there's kind of this ability to bring people together to ensure that we are all on the same page. So kind of the takeaway with respect is that really it's in the eye of the beholder. So I think that's, if there's one phrase that you remember from this part of the conversation, remember that we how we interpret respect might be a little bit different than the people that we're working with. Okay, so to illustrate this point a little bit more, I want to share this quote with you. So Doris Lessing, she's a Nobel Prize winner in literature, and she said once upon a time, it is terrible to destroy a person's picture of himself, I like to add in their self, in the interest of truth or some other abstraction. What do you think that she's trying to say there?
Not to trying to hurt their feelings.
Yes, yes. So we have this image of ourselves, and we all have it. We all kind of see ourselves in a particular way. Think about a time maybe when someone that you really trusted came to you and tried to tell you something about yourself that maybe you kind of knew was true, but you weren't ready to hear it in that moment. How did you react? Were you receptive to that information? Probably not. Because if that's not how you saw yourself in that moment, that information wasn't going to be helpful. So I like to think of kind of two questions. When we're talking with people, we're trying to support them in different ways. We can think about, is the information that I'm going to share with this person, is it true? Always want to start there. The second part, though, is it helpful? So if this person is convinced that, a particular situation is happening around them. And if we try to tell them, no, 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 that's not what's going on right now, um, that might not be helpful for that person in that moment due to their symptoms and their condition. So we don't have to force them to see this truth just because, but we can kind of allow them to sort of maintain that picture of themselves and work with that picture in making sure that their needs are being met. That makes sense. I know I'm getting you all to use a very different part of your brains this morning with our conversations. So please stop me if you're like, Amanda, that doesn't really make any sense. And we can kind of talk through it a little bit more. So respect, again, different ways that we can do that. We've talked about some of those. So asking how they want to be addressed. Do they want to be called Mr., Mrs., Sir, Ma'am, first, last name? Dressing appropriately for work, which is really important because that can give people visual clues as to what we're there to do. Using appropriate language. Now, this one is one of my favorites. So obviously at all costs, we want to try to avoid profanity whenever possible. But my favorite one with this is this idea of limiting and explaining slang or medical terminology. Now, um, before coming to the Mental Health Association, one of my first clinical jobs was as a social worker in hospice. And I remember sitting at my first team meeting with all the nurses and the medical director and everyone kind of all together. And all these different terms were being thrown around. So, this is a PRN medication, this is a BID, this is a TID. And I was like sitting there like, what on earth are they talking about? Frantically Googling on my phone to try to figure out what it was that they were saying. Especially in the medical field, it's so easy for us to just kind of throw around those terms that like we all know what we're talking about. But imagine if you were in a situation where people around you were talking about something in what sounds like a very cryptic language and you're, not feeling well, you're, kind of in distress. And now somebody is saying all these things and you have no idea what's going on. How do you think that would make you feel? Tell you. Yeah, you're not like you don't feel good about that. I was in I spent some time in Denmark and I ended up in emergency room in Denmark because I fell off my bike. And the medical team spoke mostly English to me, but then at one point they started speaking Danish and I don't speak Danish. And I just sat there and I was like, I bet they're just talking about like what this dumb American just did falling off her bike, but I had no idea. And that was really challenging for me because I wasn't sure if they were talking about just like the situation, if they were talking about something with my medical care. And so what do you think would be helpful if somebody was kind of feeling confused about the things that we're doing or trying to help them with?
Ask if they have any questions about what we're talking about.
Okay, so ask if they have any questions. I'm going to say, oh, no, I don't have any questions, even though I'm totally confused.
Explain things as you go, like explain things before you give them to them.
Using
Yes,
common language.
yes,
If they-
explanation. Yes, explanation, common language. You can say like, oh, PRN, that this is the as needed thing that we're going to do. So you can kind of use that terminology, but then also take an opportunity to explain it. And ultimately what that's going to do is that's just going to help build that trust in that person to feel more comfortable. All right, some other ways that we can demonstrate respect. This is one of my favorites, demystifying tattoos. How many people in the room have tattoos? Do you cover those tattoos when you're at work? Okay, sometimes they can't be covered. So let me tell you something that's really interesting. In the 1970s,
Yeah, okay.
what? In the 1970s, having 3 or more tattoos was associated with antisocial personality disorder. It was actually in the diagnostic manual that if a person had 3 or more tattoos, that was part of the criteria for antisocial personality disorder. Now, it's not there anymore because it's such a common part of our society. But if we think about, kind of that 70s area, 60s, 70s era, um, the people who had tattoos during that time were often either criminals or in the military. So, in particular, when you're working with an older adult, they may have extremely strong feelings about tattoos. Um, and that can be really challenging because it's a part of who we are. Um, and we shouldn't have to hide that or be afraid of that. And so to be respectful to that person, it might just be acknowledging that they noticed it and maybe offering an explanation. And it doesn't have to be this big, like in-depth thing. You don't need to turn it into like a dissertation or something, but it is a way to sort of acknowledge that this person is having feelings about something related to how I appear in front of them. Um, and let's talk about that so that we can continue to show that respect. Has anyone ever have been in a situation where someone's kind of given them a hard time because of their tattoos? It's not as common, I think, now, but we do. I've worked with some older adults that definitely had some pretty strong opinions about it. Okay, and then caring enough to ask. So we've kind of talked about this. You all sort of alluded to this in a couple different ways that, asking those questions, getting to know the person as best we can in the short period of time that we have to interact with them. And making sure, like, is this working for you? Do you need us to do something differently? Can we explain this in a different way? Would you like us to talk to someone else? Really just kind of giving them the opportunity to answer questions. Um, and the more open-ended questions that we can ask, the better. All right. So now we're going to talk a little bit about nonverbal communication. I love nonverbal communication because it's really important, especially when we're kind of in a face-to-face situation with each other. So nonverbal communication, we're going to talk about a couple different parts of nonverbal communication. Here's what I'll tell you about nonverbal communication before we even get started. Some of you look bored already. I just saw you yawn, arms crossed, slouched down. I feel like I'm not doing a really good job of keeping you all kind of on your toes, right? So, nonverbal communication matters, right? I'm just using you all as examples. So please know that I'm not trying to be offensive in any way, but it is always fun when I do these kind of presentations and I can kind of call people out. Um, I love it. I did one presentation one time where like somebody was actually asleep on the table and I was like, oh, all right, well, see, so-and-so is really just, I am not doing a good job here because that person, their nonverbal communication is telling me like, whoa, Amanda, let's try again. All right, so let's talk about the pieces of nonverbal communication and how we can kind of manage that. So this picture right here shows 2 people sitting together. What do you notice about their nonverbal communication?
Not even looking at
Yeah,
it.
you're not gonna be 100 miles apart.
Yeah, they're like 100 miles apart. They're not even looking at each other. So
One's on the phone, the other one's like looking at a bird or something.
Yeah.
One that, yeah, watching the
yeah, so the lady in the red coat, she's looking at a phone. The other lady in the jacket and the wheelchair, she looks really sad to me. She's craving some kind of conversation with this person that's sitting on the bench, but their personal space is not allowing for that to happen. So when we think about personal space, we want to make sure that we are aware of what that person considers to be their personal bubble. So everyone's personal bubble is different, right? So some people you feel more comfortable allowing them to get closer to you. Other people you want them to be kind of a little bit farther away. And so recognizing, like, as you're interacting with a person, if you get too close and they kind of take a step back, that's a clue for you. That's a clue to say, oh, okay, I've met their space. So now I know this is their zone, and I'm going to stay at this distance. If we're
I give
too
them credit,
close,
post-COVID, they're practicing social distancing, so.
yeah. Yeah. So that's still like a piece of it too, right? Like COVID has completely changed our our perception of, kind of interacting with people. So like we got so used to this social distancing and 6 feet away from each other. And so for some people that might be their bubble now. It might be that like, yep, you will not come closer than 6 feet. And other than that, like I need you to stay well over there. Anybody ever been in a situation where somebody like just got way too close to them as they were like trying to communicate with them, whether it was a patient or a colleague, family member,
Coworker.
coworker, colleagues, yes. And what did you do? What did you do when that person got too close?
I stopped interacting with them forever.
I just stopped. I was like, no, I'm walking away. But okay, you put distance. So when we're too close, that can be very intimidating and uncomfortable. When we're too far away, that could imply that we're either fearful of the situation or we're not interested in the situation. Right. So being aware of personal space is something that's really important. Now, if we had more time, one of the activities that I really like to do here, and maybe y'all can decide you want to do this, kind of on at another time. But one thing that's really fun to kind of illustrate what this looks like is to have everybody divide into two parts in the room. And each person, each line stands on opposite sides of the room. And the first round is that side one walks towards the second side. And when they've gotten close enough, the second side holds up a hand and says, that's close enough. And usually what happens is I see people kind of stop at multiple different places, right? Because everybody's personal space needs are different. Then I have the other side walk towards that first side. Then I tell people this time I want you to go towards the other side fast and aggressive looking. And the other side will stop as well. What do you think happens when the person is approaching in a faster and more aggressive way? Distance increases. That hand goes up way faster. Way faster. And if you put people in a smaller space, it goes up way faster too. So our personal space is fluid depending on where you are, who you're with, and what the situation is. You might allow people to be closer or farther away. So just paying attention to kind of where we are when we're working with people is really important, and looking for those clues. Are they coming closer to us that they want to close that space? Are they stepping back that they want to create some more distance? All right, posture. Also really important. I don't think we always think about posture as being important, but there's a couple different pieces to posture that can be really helpful. So you can have a very intimidating posture where you've kind of, are sort of arms crossed, kind of closed off, maybe some knitted eyebrows, maybe leaning forward, and that can feel really intimidating to some people. Whereas a supportive posture would be a person who's just kind of standing in a natural position, arms down, kind of has more of that open feeling. What I like about this image here is that you can see not only is that provider, has that open posture with this person, they're also comfortable enough where she can have her hand on that lady's shoulder as well. So how we present ourselves really matters. Here's one other thing that I have learned kind of in my time of interacting with people. Imagine that you come into a situation. The person that you are needing to help is in a bed. you come in and you need to start doing your job. Where do you position yourself with that person? What was that? I didn't hear that.
Lay next to him.
You're gonna lay right in bed with them.
What the head?
I love it. You're just gonna get right in there. Are you standing? Are you sitting?
I think it depends. If you're standing, you gotta keep your distance. I mean, if you can kind of crouch down so you're at eye level, I mean, that would probably be ideal.
Yes, there it is. Yes, finding a way to get at eye level with the person. Think about a time where you were sitting and trying to have a conversation with somebody who was standing. You're like, yep, okay, I'm trying to have this conversation. It feels really intimidating. I remember being at a patient's house, when again, kind of in my early days of hospice care, and the family invited me in and they said, here, take a seat next to the bed with the patient. And so I did. And then every other person in the room stood. And I sat there and I was like, do I get up? Like, this feels really weird to me because everybody else around me is standing. They invited me to sit, so I'm trying to be respectful, but I didn't feel like I was on the same um, kind of level with them. And that really made me uncomfortable as the worker coming in. So if the situation had been reversed and there were times where, I would come in, um, and maybe some of the team would be kind of standing and talking down to the person, and I would find a chair or a stool or something or crouch down so that I could get on their eye level, because that just feels more inviting, right? So that's kind of the intimidating versus supportive. All right, eye contact, also incredibly important. Now, eye contact, there's a couple things we need to remember with eye contact. We are a culture of eye contact being a good and wonderful thing. There are other cultures that don't consider eye contact to be respectful. So I've worked with a couple different groups, and I remember having this conversation one time during a training, and one of the participants raised their hand and said, Amanda, in my culture, it's considered extremely disrespectful to look an older adult in the eye. And I had to pause for a second and think, oh, that's not my cultural experience. Um, but now that is knowledge that I have, that if I were to be working with a person from that particular culture, I'd want to be more mindful of my eye contact, and using it very sparingly, or not at all. If a person is suffering from a mental health condition, they're experiencing some of that paranoia, hallucinations, or delusions, also might not be the best time to use direct eye contact. So really goes back again to, like, what does that person consider to be respectful? All right, facial expressions. How many times have we interacted with someone where we saw a face similar to this one on the screen? Anybody ever had a conversation with a person like her?
A lot now that people aren't wearing masks anymore.
Oh, yes, there's so many more things that we can see. And you know what happened when we wore masks? We didn't have to worry about those facial expressions as much because we knew nobody could see them. And our faces got really used to being able to do whatever they needed to do. And now that we don't have those to hide behind, we have to be way more mindful. I don't have a good poker face and never have. Um, you can usually know exactly what I'm thinking and feeling based on how my face looks, whether that's good, bad, or indifferent. So this is one that, like, I have to be really mindful of, because I myself have looked like this person at times when somebody was talking to me being like, what on earth? Um, so just kind of recognizing, like, if you're a person who's very expressive, know that about yourself and just kind of be mindful about it. We're not perfect. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to slip up. Our faces are going to say things that we don't want them to say. And if they do, we'll talk about kind of the effective communication side a little bit, about kind of how to kind of recover from that. So with our facial expressions, we want to think about, what are our eyes saying? Um, So if we just looked at her eyes, how do you think she's feeling?
Expensive.
Defensive, irritated, annoyed. So knowing what our eyes are saying, they say a lot. Are you using a smile or a smirk? There is a difference. And so, kind of recognizing like, if you are truly smiling, your whole face is going to show that. A smirk, you're going to know that. So being able to distinguish between those two and making sure that, again, we're not going to be perfect. Things are going to happen. Our face is going to say something we didn't want it to say. We just kind of apologize for that and kind of move on. All right, hand positioning, another really important thing. So we want to have our hands down and open as much as possible in front of us, because it can be a little intimidating or could induce some fear if they're behind us, and steady. So this steady part is a part that I struggle with because I very much talk with my hands all the time. I finally in my family history found that little bit of Italian that I swore was in there, and it comes out. So for me, I have to be really mindful of like where my hands are. So if you're a person who like talks a lot with your hands, just again, kind of the things to sort of keep in mind. Can you keep them down? Can you keep them more steady? That's going to just kind of help that person feel more comfortable. All right, so now we're going to talk about de-escalation. So to get us started with this is my favorite. I want you all to think about what makes you angrier when you are already angry. So like you are right at that point where you could tip. What is that thing that is going to tip you over the edge?
Being told to calm down.
Yes, being told to calm down. What else?
Being dramatic.
Being dramatic.
Yeah.
Being told to smile.
Being told to smile or like act in a particular way. What else? I'm guessing that's a phrase that you've heard before, which is why you're saying. What else? Somebody gets in my face and starts like yelling at me, and I'm already like right on that edge. Forget it. Like it's all over. What else?
Try to bring light to a crappy situation.
They try to what?
They're trying to make light to a crappy situation. Like trying to use like, it could always be worse.
Yes. Yeah. So like not taking into account our feelings and just kind of dismissing them. Like, well, it could be way worse than this. Yeah, absolutely. How about temperature?
Physical contact.
What?
Any sort of physical contact.
Any sort of physical contact.
Hold my
A
hand.
little poke. Yep.
Give you a
Sort of
hug.
giving you, come here, it'll all be fine. No, get away from me. Yep. How about if the temperature is too hot or too cold? Like if you're physically like, if you're hungry, anybody get hangry? I do. Yeah, yeah. So like, it's a good thing to just have a snack for me. I'm very much like the Snickers commercials. It doesn't have to be a Snickers that you give me, but like the way that we are physically feeling can be something that can push us over the edge. So the reason why I always like to start our de-escalation conversation with this idea of what would push us over the edge is because once we can think about what would push us over the edge, we can think about the opposite things that we could do to de-escalate a situation. So let's take, for example, the one where a person's not acknowledging our feelings. So what would be the opposite of not acknowledging someone's feelings?
Over talking.
Over talking?
Trying to say you know how they feel and how like that you understand exactly where they're at.
Okay, and what is that called?
Empathy.
Empathy. Empathy. Empathy is a great de-escalation tactic. We're trying to put ourselves in that person's shoes. How are they feeling right now? What is going through their head? What are they thinking? And we're acknowledging that this is a crappy situation that you're in. It doesn't matter if there's a crappier situation that they could be in. Right now, in this moment, they feel like they're in a crappy situation. We're going to acknowledge that. I can understand that this is really difficult for you. We're here to help. Let's talk about how we can make that happen. How do we help you feel better? Okay, so empathy. Other de-escalation tactics. Removing the irritant. Sometimes we can't remove the irritant, but if we can, let's say there's a family member who is just continuing to escalate the situation. Maybe we're going to tag team the situation and say, you know what, I'm going to take you over here so that my colleague can work with this person over here. We're going to remove that irritant. The other thing is sometimes we can be the irritant, and that's okay. There's a reason why we have partners because maybe we need to tap out and let somebody else take over. So removing the irritant if at all possible. Any questions on that one? Okay. So another tactic would be using a soft and calming voice. What do you think happens if a person is like really loud and you start to speak softer? What do you think might happen?
Who are you?
They're going
They
to
get
lower.
far enough so they can hear.
Yes, they're going to lower their volume so that they can hear you. So like if somebody is talking really loud and you just gradually start to lower your volume, naturally their volume's going to follow. Might take a little while, but we can get there. All right. Also, we can decrease the stimulation. I remember going into houses sometimes where like the TV was on, the radio was on, people were talking in the other room, like there's cats, all over the place or whatever. And it's like, oh my goodness, there are just way too many things happening right now. Um, and so I was like, we need to decrease the stimulation in this room. And to do that, I would say to the person, you know what, I'm having a hard time hearing you. Could we turn the TV off or down, if they really wanted to have it on? And what you might have noticed that I did there was say, I want to make sure that I am hearing you, that I am able to effectively communicate with you. So we're not, putting any blame or anything on that person. We also can negotiate. What do you think this would look like, particularly like in your role? What would negotiation look like?
Well, if you're trying to get somebody to come along or do, go along with whatever your job is, you might say, hey, let me do this, and then we can get back to whatever you were doing.
Okay, so we need to do X, Y, and Z. So we're not going to negotiate and say, you know what, let's start with Y. We'll come back to X and Z later. So negotiating kind of, or, can we do this first? And then we can go back to that. Yeah, so that negotiation can be really helpful. Problem solving. What might this look like?
Include them in the problem. You tell them what the problem is and ask how we can correct it.
Yes. What exactly is the problem? So a lot of times when a person is escalated, there is a basic need that is not being met. So is everyone familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs?
Yeah.
Okay. So at the bottom of the pyramid, we have that like safety, food, shelter, kind of the basics, right? So we just talked about getting hangry. So if you approach me, I'm like really hangry. because it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I didn't eat lunch because my family was gone. And I didn't make anything for myself. You walk in my door, it's 3 o'clock. I'm agitated and frustrated and angry. And you might say to me, Amanda, have you had anything to eat today? Problem solving, starting with those basics. Now I say, no, I haven't. Okay, well, let's figure out how to solve that problem so that we can move on to the next problem. Great. All right. Using the person's suggestions of what's worked for them in the past. Now, this is one, I'm going to come back to this in just a moment after we go through kind of the other options here. Compromising. So again, kind of similar to negotiation. And we already talked about empathy. So let's talk about using a person's suggestions for what's worked for them in the past. When you are in a situation where a person is agitated and aggressive, probably not the best time to ask them what has helped you feel better in the past. But if you get past that situation and then you're continuing to kind of have some conversations, you've given me something to eat and now I'm calmed down. Now we can maybe have a conversation and say, okay, how do we prevent this potentially from happening again? What kind of things and tools can we put in place? Any questions on those? Okay. All right, so effective interventions. So things that we need to keep in mind. First of all, is the behavior that they are showing understandable based on their experience? So does the behavior make sense based on how the person is thinking and feeling? What's our role in the situation? Are we potentially adding to the problem or are we part of the solution? So this kind of goes back to that. If we're part of the irritant, we may need to kind of tap out. And is the environment contributing to the problem? So we talked about that too. That kind of, again, goes back to that removing of the irritants. All right, so now we are going to get a chance to practice. So I'm going to stop sharing this screen and I'm going to go to another screen and I'm going to introduce you all to our demonstrating respect game. So this is a game that we created. It's kind of a choose your own adventure situation. And we are going to interact with a person, just kind of trying to see how they will respond to us based on the way that we are responding to them and based on how we potentially look. So let me get that loaded up here really quickly. All right, so our demonstrating respect game, and I'll send you all a link to this because personally, I think it's just really fun to have a chance to kind of practice in real time where you're not necessarily kind of tied to making sure that you're doing something well for a person. So like this is a safe space to make mistakes. So we have these 4 individuals right here. We're gonna not play the tutorial. We're gonna get ourselves a nice avatar here who's wearing some scrubs.
Amanda,
Or-
we can't see it.
Oh no, you can't?
We just see the PowerPoint still.
Oh, okay, wait a minute. Stop sharing. Let's try that again.
That's
Okay.
it.
Okay, great. All right, so we're gonna have this be our avatar, our person who's gonna be having these interactions, and we're gonna give this person just a generic name, and we are going to meet my friend Joe here. So Joe is a 75-year-old veteran from the Vietnam War. He's very serious and prefers that we are formal, and he gets irritated easily. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna meet Joe here. So we come into the room, he's looking pretty irritated. He kind of glares at us without saying anything. And we're going to make some choices of how we are going to interact with Joe. So we can either informally introduce ourselves or try to kind of lighten the mood with some lighthearted, friendly tone. How would you respond? Formal. All right, so he tells Jay, says, hello, Mr. Brown. I'm Alex. I know that you're new here, so I wanted to introduce myself. Can I come in? Okay, and now what's going to happen is you'll notice up at the top of the screen, we have 3 bars, our demonstrating respect, our responsibilities, and care. So he kind of grunts and then relaxes just a little bit. All right, so we did well with our care, we did well with our responsibilities and demonstrating respect. All right, so now Joe says, do you always turn up for work in your pajamas? When I was your age, people dressed respectfully for work. So, do we acknowledge that scrubs can look like pajamas and explain why we're wearing them? Or do we clarify for him that they're not pajamas and that a lot of professionals wear scrubs?
First one.
First one. All right, so we're acknowledging it. So I can see how you might think that, but many medical professionals wear scrubs. They're low maintenance and make it easier for us to perform maybe difficult tasks. All right, let's see. How's Joe? Okay, I hadn't thought about it that way, but it's going to take some getting used to. All right, so Joe's feeling pretty good. All right, so we're doing pretty well here. Now, what I would like to do is start this over for you. And now we're going to see what would happen if we had responded to Joe differently, just so you can kind of see how those interactions might change. We're not doing a tutorial. We like having the scrubs on because we know he's going to have an opinion about them. All right, so now we go into Joe. All right, so this time we're going to be lighthearted and friendly and try to lighten things up. So what happens here? Hey, buddy, it looks like you're not having a great day. Maybe I can put a smile on your face. Joe is annoyed. Closes his eyes and then stares at you. All right, so we didn't do well here. Care goes down, responsibility goes down, demonstrating respect goes down. So you try to smooth it over with some upbeat talk. We're going to try to make this better. Oh, are you having a bad day? Maybe a good dessert can turn things around. Do you think Joe's going to respond well to that? He's not. Nope. I seriously doubt it. Look, I'm busy. Can I help you with something or are we done? Uh-oh. No good. Okay, so Joe is not the kind of person who likes that light-hearted kind of tone. So this baby talk, not going to be good for him. So we're going to just kind of excuse ourselves and say, okay, you're obviously upset. I'll come back later. And Joe said, yeah, you do that. Or don't. See if I care. So the way that we potentially respond in situations could be very different. Now, I'll tell you that one of the other characters, she is totally great with like the lighthearted, fun, upbeat kind of energy, and she's going to respond very different. So the whole point is recognizing that people will respond differently based on a number of things. So again, going back to that concept of respect being in the eye of the beholder. All right, any questions on that? Okay, any questions on the topic of de-escalation, particular, kind of situations that you want to talk through about how we could have done things differently? And just kind of any questions in general about this particular part of the presentation. Okay. I have a 5-year-old who loves to do sort of like the thumb thing with me about like how her day was and stuff. So like useful information, medium information, not useful at all. Kind of where are we feeling right now? Okay, kind of in the middle. Okay. Is there anything that we could talk about that would help you feel, or things that like we didn't cover that would give you kind of more tools and resources to feel more effective?
You feel like it reiterated good practice that some of us are probably already doing, but reinforce that, so thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, it's I think one of the things that's that I've sort of found in my own experience is once you learn these things, they're pretty much in the forefront of your mind. And it's just good to occasionally have like a little opportunity to reflect and say, oh, maybe I could have done that particular situation differently, or maybe this is something that I could continue to add in as we go through. Um, that concludes the de-escalation part. So why don't we take a 5-minute break and we'll start back with the effective communication at 11.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Hopefully we are making our way back in as I stand between you and lunchtime. We're going to spend 1 hour talking about effective communication, and then you will be able to get back on track and continue on with your day. Everybody back? Looks like pretty much everybody's back. Okay.
Yeah, just about.
Want me to give it another minute?
That's a go
I
ahead.
think we're good.
Okay. All right. Good enough, we say. Okay. So now we're going to switch gears. We're going to talk about effective communication and kind of how we can unlock our connections by using the 3 pillars of effective communication. So from this, we're going to be able to define the 3 pillars of effective communication: active listening, nonverbal communication, and verbal expression. We're going to describe how respect and effective communication are essential to building meaningful connections, and we are going to apply strategies to support effective communication. Okay, so what is the definition of communication? How do we define it? Merriam-Webster's dictionary says that communication is the process by which information is exchanged between individuals through a common system of symbols, signs, or behaviors. So that includes active listening, nonverbal communication, which also includes something we like to call micro expressions, and verbal communication. So we like to kind of think of these kind of all coming together, sort of these 3 things. We are going to talk about each of these individually. Obviously, all of them happen simultaneously, but for the purposes of our activities and learning, we're going to kind of focus one after another. Now, we just talked about respect and what that looks like, so we're not going to spend more time doing that. We also have talked a little bit about empathy. Now, this particular video, I love this video. We can watch it. It's essentially Mark Ruffalo explaining what empathy is on Sesame Street. Has anyone ever seen this video before? Would you like to watch it?
Sure.
All right. Now, hopefully, I'm also sharing my sound. So can you hear that?
No.
Yeah, what's
No.
that?
Okay. All right. Well, let's do this then. Let's stop sharing for a second because sometimes it's like you have to also remember to share your computer's audio, which I think is probably, yes, there, what I did not do. All right. Okay. Because I have a headset on, it's telling me I have to use a different thing to share my audio. Okay, there we go. All right, so let's learn about empathy from Mark Ruffalo.
Hello, I'm Mark,
And I'm Murray.
and we're here to tell you about the word empathy.
Can you hear that?
Yeah.
Yes, okay.
Empathy, yes, empathy.
Tell them about the word empathy. What's wrong?
Well, you're not gonna believe this, Mark.
What?
But I can't remember what empathy means.
No, that's okay. That's okay. I'll tell them what empathy means.
Oh, boy! This is so exciting. Mark Ruffalo is gonna tell us about empathy. Oh, boy, oh, boy, oh, boy, oh, boy!
Can I do it?
Go, please, go for it, Mark.
All right. Empathy is when you're able to understand and care about how someone else is feeling.
Oh, right. That's what empathy is.
Yes.
I don't get it.
What?
Sorry.
Okay. Let me see if I can explain it to you in some way.
Okay, I'm gonna listen.
Let's say I'm walking along and
What?
I stubbed my toe. Oh, that hurts.
Oh, you poor thing,
Murray.
Mark. Oh,
Murray.
that hurts. I
It
can
hurts
imagine
so much.
exactly how you feel.
That's
Ouch.
it.
Oh, wow, what's it?
That's it. That's empathy.
What's empathy?
You could imagine exactly how I feel. You could understand just how it felt. That's empathy.
I still don't get it.
What?
I still don't get it.
Okay. Let's think of another way.
Okay, let's think of another way. Thinking.
Oh, Murray.
What?
Did I tell you about that time when I lost my favorite teddy bear?
Oh, no.
It was,
This is very sad. Did you love that teddy bear?
I
Mark?
loved that teddy bear.
Oh, I can imagine exactly how you feel. It's really sad feeling. It makes me want to cry like this.
It was sad. It was so sad. But you know what?
What?
You know what empathy is.
I do?
That was empathy.
What?
You could understand how I was feeling, exactly how I was feeling, and understood it. That's empathy.
I get it now. Yes! Yes, I get it!
Yes,
I understand
yes.
empathy!
You understand empathy,
I'm
Murray.
so happy right now!
I'm
it
happy
makes me want
too.
to dance the dance of happiness!
I can imagine exactly how you feel. I want to dance the dance of happiness too.
Then what are we waiting for?
Let's do
Empathy!
Hello,
No,
I'm
we
Mark.
don't need to
And
watch it
I'm
again.
Murray.
All right. So, what did we learn from the empathy slide? Anything that stands out?
Not everybody understands.
Not everybody what?
Empathy.
Can you guys still hear me okay? Because I had to like switch something on my headset. So do you still hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. Okay. All right. So I occasionally I teach at CCBC some human services counseling classes, and I found that video many years ago when I first started teaching. And even though it's kind of a fun sort of way to learn it, I feel like it really hits home like what exactly empathy is, and gives you a chance to kind of see that. So I hope you enjoyed that as an opportunity to kind of learn a little bit more about empathy. Okay, so we're going to switch and talk about active listening. So this is where we're going to start doing some fun activities, keep us motivated and going until we get to that lunch hour. And so for this particular activity, what we're going to do is you are going to pair up, and I am going to give you a 2-minute timer. One of you is going to be the listener. One of you is going to be the person who is talking. The person who is talking has 2 full minutes to talk. The person who is listening is only going to listen. No questions, no comments, nothing. You're just going to let that person talk. And so you can choose what topic you're going to talk about, but I want you to, that first person who's going to be talking is going to take 2 minutes to just talk. After that 2 minutes is over, I'm going to ask the listener to kind of paraphrase back to the speaker what they heard. And then the speaker will confirm yes or no, they did a good job hearing things, or did they miss anything. Then we're going to switch. Okay? Makes sense? All right, so find a partner. Your tables make it relatively easy, looks like, so that's good.
We have a odd.
Do we have an odd? All right, if there is an odd, we can just do one group of 3. All right, so speakers, who is being the speaker? Speakers, raise your hands.
Raise your hand, Derek. Sure. There you go.
Okay, all right, speakers, you have 2 minutes, and I'm going to time you. So 2 minutes. Listener, you're just listening. All right, 2 minutes starting now.
So, man, it's fine. 38. Not to get it fixed.
I didn't feel my fucking yeah. Right now, it's receiving. Stop it, flights to you still have to kind of come off the bike. You're talking about. What's that? It's 52 inch.
All right, listeners, paraphrase back. What did you hear? All right, everybody have a chance to paraphrase? All right, switch roles. Now the speaker is going to be the listener. Listener, you've got 2 minutes. All right, listener, paraphrase back.
What's that?
I know,
All right. Okay. Let's come back.
I appreciate this.
Okay. So,
Stay through people.
all right. So let's be honest. Listeners, did the listeners truly listen for the full 2 minutes, or were there questions or things that they were saying at all during that time?
I'm self-absorbed enough that they can talk for 2 minutes straight.
I did.
Yeah.
That was fun.
So 2 minutes straight felt like a long time, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And for the listener, was 2 minutes straight of listening hard to do?
In this environment, no.
Okay.
And
Tell me.
I think for us to run calls, it's not difficult to listen for that short period of time, but so many other times, if we're just hanging out in the firehouse, given today's environment, people are, always on their phone, or it kind of depends on the situation. If it's an important conversation, then I think you have people that are engaged, but if it's just every day, then you probably have people that don't care.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of things that I noticed kind of watching you all. Listeners, I saw a lot of like heads nodding. I saw a lot of good like nonverbal communication, that you were taking in the information, you were facing the person, you weren't distracted by other things. So kind of from a nonverbal standpoint, even though I couldn't hear like all pieces of the conversation, it looked like you were very engaged nonverbally. When we were paraphrasing back, how accurate were we? Pretty accurate? Okay. So, so this activity can be it can be challenging, because we often are listening to, or we're hearing to respond, instead of hearing to understand. And I saw an interesting quote recently that said, "We have 2 ears and 1 mouth." So our ears, when we're having conversations, are really the more important piece. But we're not always trained to do that, because naturally we want to respond to what the person is saying to us. We want to ask questions. We want to share our own thoughts and opinions. And so we're not really listening to hear what that person is saying and kind of absorb it and understand it. We're listening typically to be able to respond kind of from our own perspective. So just taking kind of some time every once in a while to just do an activity like this, where you're really just kind of getting your brain used to completely listening, really kind of tuning into what the other person is saying, can be really helpful. All right, so that's our active listening one. So what did we kind of have as some takeaways here? So when we're talking with somebody, we want to find ways to engage with them. So like I kind of pointed out, I saw a lot of the listeners giving that nonverbal communication, that eye contact, showing the person that they were in fact engaged and listening. We can demonstrate an understanding of what's being said as well as what's being felt. Sometimes these are different, right? So a person might be saying one thing, but feeling another. So again, this is where that empathy is going to kind of come into play. We can integrate an awareness of that person's history into our response. So if this is an individual that you've frequently been to them for whatever reason, making sure that we're bringing that awareness in, and kind of sharing in our communication that like we heard them, and what they were saying the last time that we were there for whatever the situation was. All right, so now we're going to talk about nonverbal communication. And for this one, we are going to do a silent movie activity. And so I'm going to ask if anyone in the group is brave enough to be some actors in a silent movie. I know some of you have to be willing to do this.
How many do you need?
2 to 3.
Present. Following.
All right.
Cover actors.
Okay. Now, the rest of us. Okay, so what I'm going to ask is now I need 2 to 3 people who will write our silent movie for us. Okay, we got everybody who's going to write the silent movie and who's going to be our actors. Okay.
2 to 3 to write. Who's gonna write? All right, Diver and Linda.
Oh, you got to sign. See, I can't do that because I'm not there. Okay, so we've got our writers and our actors. Okay, so what I'm going to ask is that the writers and the actors, is there a place kind of outside of the room that they can go for a few minutes to kind of create their silent movie?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to give you all 5 minutes to go create your silent movie. And the rest of you are going to be the audience. And when they come back, they're going to perform their silent movie to us. And we have to try to decide what their silent movie was about. Strictly on nonverbal communication.
That'd be the best movie ever.
Now I feel like we need to like really record this on a phone too, so that like this is a good part of the recording, because they should probably stand like in the front of the room, maybe in front of that first row of tables so that I can see them too. And if they don't take the full 5 minutes to come up with stuff, that's fine. But I just wanted to give them a little bit of time to kind of come up with a scenario, do their kind of short little movie here for us. So for our audience members, what are things that you're going to be looking for to tell you what the story might be about?
Hand gestures, expressions.
Body movements.
Body movements, hand gestures, expressions. Yes. Great.
Scenery. We have that kind of time.
Where are they positioned? Like, are they close to each other? Are they farther apart? Since I can't go get them, someone from there will have to kind of bring them back in when they're ready, since I'm not physically there.
Look like you're still working.
Yeah, you just let us know when you want them to come back.
Well, as long as they feel ready, then they can come back. So whenever they feel like they've got their movie together for us, then they can come on back.
Call back.
Call them back. We're between lunch now. Quick movie.
It was the trailer.
The trailer.
Whenever you're ready.
How long is it supposed to be? 20 minutes, so 31 minutes.
Oh, like a minute or two.
Oh.
Enough to give them a story that they can guess.
Enough to have a story down. So I'm gonna turn you to the side.
Great.
Oh.
Beautiful.
Should be able to see them pretty well here.
Yep, that's great.
Well, your movie idea was very creative.
Yeah, it was just one scene. I think everybody got one.
What was the one scene movie that was shared in the?
We won't go there.
No, somebody suggested that the actors just kiss for 5 minutes straight. Different actor. Terrible actor.
When you all decided to go into emergency management, you never thought you would sit in a training and have to be actors and screenwriters and audience members, did you? I'm throwing something hopefully totally new at you.
All right, you all ready?
No.
Well, up front, my two actors.
All credits.
Okay, they are all back.
All right. So
Sure.
again, our job as the audience members is try to guess what the story is that they're telling us as they are doing this strictly without any verbal communication.
Like charades.
I like, and action. And scene. All right. Nice job to our actors. Round of applause for your colleagues there. All right. So, what were they doing? What happened?
It was tomfoolery.
Tomfoolery.
Micromanaging.
Ooh, micromanaging. Okay. What else did you see? How were they feeling? What emotions did you see in their nonverbal communication?
Really? Just, yeah.
So aggressive.
So aggressive. So aggressive. Yeah. Anything else? Did the situation resolve?
Yeah. When he left.
Okay, they left. Do you think they solved the problem?
No, because we got pissed off at each other.
Okay, no, they didn't solve the problem because they were pissed off at each other. All right. Anything else that you saw? All right, writers, tell us the story.
Yeah. That ain't what the truth.
I think the story was supposed to be that the key that Preston was using was not the right one. So the chief was taking it away. And
Okay,
they lost their tool.
lost the tool. The micromanagement, was that part of the original story line?
I can see how it plays in.
All right. So, so how was that? Like, how was it, first of all, for the actors? Like, how was that trying to portray that situation without being able to say anything at all?
It was harder to come up with a scenario to do, but then we just kind of won.
Yeah. So you had to really think about, like, what nonverbal communication can I use to portray this particular situation? we typically rely on our verbal communication to be able to explain things to people. And so it's really hard when that particular thing is taken away from us. Audience, what was it like kind of watching this interaction with no words?
Weird.
Weird.
Should've known the other side.
Did you feel like you really understood what was happening, or were you a little lost?
I feel like I'm just,
You got the gist, but maybe not all the like nuance pieces to it.
yeah.
Okay. Great. Um, okay, so nonverbal communication, like I told you kind of in the beginning of the day, like I'm all about giving us opportunities to really kind of practice these things that we're talking about. And nonverbal communication, I think, is one of those things that we typically don't think about. We don't always acknowledge that that's a really important part of the way that we're communicating. Our nonverbal communication could be saying something completely different than the words that are coming out of our mouth. Now, has anyone ever been in a situation where that's happened to them, where like somebody was saying something, but their nonverbal communication did not match at all? I've been in that situation. In that
Talking to my wife. Yeah.
Talking to your wife. Okay. Uh-huh. I'm a wife myself, so I get it. I know what you're getting at. When you were in that situation, were you more likely to pay attention to the words coming out of your wife's mouth or the nonverbal communication she was giving you?
Actually not in your word.
You didn't hear a word.
It depends on how loud she's talking.
Okay. But her nonverbal communication was speaking louder than the words that she was saying. Right? Oh, yes. Okay. So nonverbal communication is huge, which is why we just spent all that time in the de-escalation talking about nonverbal communication, you know, what it is, how it is that we use it effectively. Because even if the words that we're saying are what we want to, get that person to kind of think about or respond to, if we are saying it in a way that our nonverbal communication is not matching that and giving them the opposite information, it is likely that they are going to follow that. So let's talk about a couple kind of takeaways with nonverbal communication. So again, eye contact and facial expressions as appropriate. Making sure that we're aware of cultural considerations. So is this a culture that wants to have that eye contact or not? Our smiles versus smirks, again, really important. What about our eyebrows? Some people have extremely expressive eyebrows. Me, not so much. I can't move them around as much as some people can. But we sometimes, I think, I've been in conversations with people where like their eyebrows are saying so much to me, and I'm not even sure that they realize that like their eyebrows are doing a lot of talking. So again, just kind of recognizing that these are things that other people are seeing, and how do we want them to support the message that we are saying verbally. Being mindful of our body language. So again, how are we positioned? What is our posture? What is our hand positioning? We talked about being at the same level. Can we get eye to eye? Can we have that appropriate distance? Fidgeting, looking at watches and phones. We are so distracted as a society now by our phones. We are available 24/7. And it's really easy to be sitting and having a conversation with someone and like you get a buzz on your phone or your watch and you just kind of automatically look at it. We've sort of like trained ourselves to do that. I had a manager one time who every single time we were in a meeting, she looked at her phone at least 10 times. And it used to make me nuts because I was like, am I not important in this moment? Like, like is there something else that like is more important than the conversation that we're having right now? So that was a strong lesson for me to make sure that when I'm having a conversation with any of my staff members or colleagues, that like my phone is put away. I have a Fitbit, so I get notifications on my watch, but I try very hard to like not look at any of those things. And sometimes we have to. Sometimes we know that like we need to respond in an emergency. But it's again just kind of the idea of being mindful of it. All right, so one last activity here on verbal communication, and this is where those pictures are going to come into play that we printed earlier. Okay, so again, we're going to pair up this time. If you want to move around a little bit, so you're paired with somebody different, that would be great. We're passing out, we've got some sheets with some different drawings on them. And for this particular activity, we are going to use our verbal communication skills to describe the picture to another, to the drawer. So you're going to have a person who's describing and a person who's drawing, and you're going to switch roles again. So decide who's going to describe, decide who's going to draw. The describer will choose one of the pictures on the paper, and then they will describe that picture to the person. All right, so wait a minute. You're moving around and you're talking, so wait a minute. Okay, so there's some parameters on how you describe the picture. Everybody hear me?
Almost, so I printed these, so there won't, that's weird.
Oh, the pairs.
For every pair, but you can share, get your picture and then move on, or two of you can sit next to each other.
Yeah. Okay, so everyone's got a pair and everyone has a picture that they're going to be describing. So here's the parameters on describing the picture. You cannot name the object. Okay, so you can't say draw a sunshine, right? So you cannot name the object. You have to describe the picture. So shapes, sizes, all of that. You can say like circle, square, etc., but you cannot say the item. And then once the person has described the picture, you're going to compare and see how well you did, and then we'll switch roles. So again, I'll give you 2 minutes for drawing and describing, and then we'll switch. Go ahead.
This. 90 degrees beach. 2 inches. Right.
Halfway through,
You get it out in the water. That's crazy. Drawing in a second line. Parallel.
Two or three vertical lines. Draw
all lines across, go down like half an inch, draw lines across, half an inch, across, so you get
Definitely the top part here. Start the read split half horizontally.
Okay, now underneath that, roll 3, 2, and so to the other.
3/4 of the way about.
Make a downward
They
step.
go over the top. And then your horizontal line, so they're like shallow.
Yep.
That looks really good. Very bottom. More level. Two is draw. One is gonna be.
In the center of those three,
Second point.
draw rectangle
3/4.
alongside
Horizontal.
horizontal.
Into the rectangle.
Inside, one side, one side.
Then, we have our shape split and tonight the top half of the bottom head. Middle of that, you're gonna go 3 breathes, put a little square to the center line. And breathe into the picture to the right of your building. About half an inch down from the top. Draw another rectangle.
That's what tells us.
Now you wanna make a.
All right.
Out of the rectangle, draw one squiggle line.
Compare your pictures. How did we do?
The back. The perspective.
You get to pick the back.
And John, I'm gonna draw.
Yeah, spot on.
All right. Okay, so now we're gonna switch, and so the person who is describing will now be the drawer, and so I'm gonna give you 2 minutes to have your next round of drawing. All right, go ahead.
And something you get if you sell.
So.
This thing has wheels.
It's a screen sounds longer than a simple rectangle with rounded corners.
It has no. And it is not. It has
And a spider number of legs.
One that's 8 legs, small.
They're down at 45.
Comes out that
Down the middle of it, way to draw a straight line, so down, it's 3/4 of the way, then to draw 35 or those 3 lines. And take and also. Yeah, and then from that line, just draw the line.
Did it bigger. Exactly what I wanted there.
Well, lots of line about 1 inch. But a little
So if a windshield down, just take
Three circles.
All right. Let's wrap up those drawings. Okay. All right, who accurately drew the picture that was described? Did anybody get it exactly right?
Yes.
Okay. Who was, I know, though, these are going to get hung up, I hope, somewhere. Who was pretty close? Okay, anybody completely off? Did anybody not even draw remotely what the person was trying to describe? Thank you for being honest. All right, so what was being described?
What was being described? Pretty good.
The log cabin.
Okay, and what did you draw?
Yeah, take it up. You can take it up. Really appreciate it.
Oh. Rainbow Bridge.
Beautiful.
Okay. All right. So let's use this one as an example. So what Did you feel like the communication that was being given to you, the verbal communication, was effective or not effective?
Obviously not effective.
Okay. What was there anything in particular that made it not effective for you?
I guess maybe like the location of where to draw the individual items, like whether it was left, right, top, bottom.
Okay.
The description of each was pretty good, but I'm trying to orient, in my head where the first shape I drew, where was the next set of shapes actually supposed to be.
Aha. Okay. So there was a piece of the communication that was missing. You were missing, like you got the
So I
shapes.
was told like to draw a rectangle, and then I think it was, he instructed us to draw 3 horseshoe shapes around the one side evenly spaced apart. So.
Okay. All right. So there were some pieces missing that kind of made it more difficult for you to be able to effectively draw. You needed more of the kind of landmarks of like where does this shape go in comparison to the others. The other way to do this activity is to get people to write down the steps of how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. You might have done this in like science class back in like middle school or high school. Um, and what usually happens is like you write down the steps and then the teacher will read the steps and try to make the sandwich based on it. And what often happens is that there are little pieces that are missing because we just assume, everybody knows how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. So, it might like the instruction might say, get 2 slices of bread. Okay, so you like go and get 2 slices of bread. And then you have these 2 slices of bread. Or maybe it says, go get a loaf of bread. And so you get the loaf of bread, and then it says, spread the peanut butter on the bread. Well, if you literally spread the peanut butter on the bread, you're going to be taking that peanut butter and you're going to spread it on top of the bag. So pieces can kind of fall off and be missed. So that's why we do this particular activity, is to really get us to think about what are all the pieces of verbal communication that we need to make sure that we are giving that person. We have to give the very distinctive step by step by step instructions. So let's talk about some kind of takeaways around verbal communication. So one of the things that's really important when we're talking about verbal communication is making sure that we are speaking to the person in an appropriate way. So if we're speaking to an adult, we're going to talk adult to adult. If we're speaking to a child, we're going to maybe change our language to make sure that they are able to understand that. Our voice tone really matters, particularly if we're talking to people who are experiencing any type of hearing loss. And the reason why is that the midtones are a tone that sticks around in our hearing for a long time. Higher tones tend to be the ones that we lose first. So if a person has like a naturally higher tone voice, it might be more difficult for somebody who's having some hearing loss in that area to hear them. So if we can bring it down to more of a mid-tone, that will help us effectively communicate. Making sure that the pace of speech is appropriate. So one thing you can do in this activity is tell people, give these instructions in 30 seconds. And so you get this rapid fire instructions. And what's going to happen? You are going to miss things as the drawer. So we don't want to speak too fast. We also don't want to speak so slowly that that's like offensive to a person. We can make sure to use communication strategies that are appropriate to the person's disability or needs. We're going to talk in a minute specifically about hearing loss, but if you know that that particular person has more hearing loss on their left side, a strategy could be that we're going to always position ourselves on the right side because we know that side they can hear better from. We can also use something that's called a touchback to make sure that the person understands. Now, this is done very intentionally, and we are going to kind of think back to that concept of the picture that we have of ourselves. And when we do a touchback, we are going to use ourselves as the example. So we could say to a person, can you repeat that back to me to ensure I did not miss anything. So we're putting the pressure to remember everything on ourselves. So if we're giving somebody instructions in that emergency situation, we might say, you know, I want to make sure I didn't miss anything. Can you repeat that back to me? So again, we're putting that pressure kind of on ourselves. We're not expecting that person to remember everything. If they miss something, then we can go back and communicate that again. So we know that there can be barriers to communication. So sometimes there's sensory changes or challenges. So a person who's experiencing hearing or vision loss, there might be environmental interference. There's too much noise or too many people. There's people they don't want in that situation. We might not have all of the information that we need. So maybe we don't know that that person didn't have lunch, and that's why they're feeling hangry in this moment. So when we can gather some more of that information, we can hopefully increase our ability to communicate effectively. There could also be a misunderstanding. So this goes back to that conversation around respect and kind of the respect in the eye of the beholder. Do we have a different perspective of the situation? Is there a cultural or personal bias that might be involved in this situation? Or did we maybe interpret the situation not correctly based on that person's perspective? And then behavioral health disorders can also be a barrier potentially. Cognitive impairment, depression, anxiety, if we have the paranoia, the hallucinations, or delusions. Communication strategies can be really helpful for us, especially when we're working with somebody who might be experiencing some hearing loss. So some strategies are to be clear and concise in our communication. That's why we just did that activity. So we could practice how to be clear and concise in describing something that we need a person to do. We want to remain courteous and open-minded. So this one can be really hard, especially if we're starting to kind of get in that escalated situation. So we're going to kind of use all those tools we've been talking about this morning and try to remain open-minded. We again want to be mindful of our nonverbal communication, making sure that our tone is reflective of what we're trying to say, so we don't have kind of that is this over yet kind of tone, but you know that we have sort of a neutral tone. One of the things that was really challenging for me when I very first started working in hospice care is because I naturally am kind of an upbeat person, I had to be really mindful that sometimes that upbeat tone did not work in the particular situation that I was in. So recognizing kind of when you might need to change your tone. Multiple modes of communication are always going to be our best bet. So can we give that person nonverbal communication, verbal communication? Can we give them written communication? Ways that they can continue to absorb that information in order to effectively make sure that we're all on the same page. Practice our active listening. So that little 2-minute activity, practicing and making sure that we feel comfortable with active listening. Building on our emotional intelligence, which is what we've been doing over the last couple hours together. Embracing feedback. So this one can be a little bit hard, but if you're having a conversation with somebody and they say, you know what, I don't really feel like you're listening, or I'm not really sure that you're present in this moment. They're saying that because they want to have a better connection with you. And it's easy to take offense in that moment, but try to allow yourself some grace and have that be a learning opportunity where you can say, okay, what can I do different next time? All right, so some specific strategies for working with a person who might be experiencing hearing loss. We want to make sure that we're seen as well as heard. So make sure we're in good lighting and that our facial expressions or gestures are giving the person clues to what we're trying to say. We want to face that person directly and speak clearly. Maintain eye contact as appropriate. We like to use this term, preserve the person's ego. So it goes back to that idea of our picture of ourselves, making sure that we are recognizing how they see themselves and using that to guide our conversation. We want to be patient, speak naturally, and be inclusive. So we want to earlier, I think one of the examples that came up with communication was, having that be sort of a team process, making sure that that person is involved. And if possible, when we're working with a person who's experiencing hearing loss, we're going to find that quiet place to have those conversations, try to reduce some of that background noise. All right, so my last activity for you all in our last couple of minutes is for you to find a piece of paper or something, and I would like for you to identify 3 ways that you can improve your communication with those that you work with. I'm not going to ask you to share. These are just for you, but based on the information that we've talked about, the things that we've learned, things that you've kind of had in the past, what are those 3 ways that you're going to work to improve your communication with those, with your patients, with your colleagues, those that you're interacting with. And then we have a couple minutes for questions once you're done writing those things down. Does anyone want to share their ideas of how they're going to work to improve? No pressure. Any question? Go ahead.
Be an active listener would be beneficial in your communication skills.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Any other questions, comments, concerns, thoughts?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, wonderful. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you having us here with you today. My colleague Alicia has been on with us as well. She's going to be doing some of the other presentations. So we appreciate you inviting us to be part of your opportunity to continue to build your skills. I hope the information was helpful. And if any other questions come up kind of as you're processing, please don't hesitate to reach out. And look at that, right on time for lunch.